the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission. I'm very pleased to see so many faces here tonight. I do want to first thank Wilmington City Council President Theo Gregory for giving us the chambers tonight, and I also see several councilmen with us, Councilman Hanifa Shabazz, Councilman Justin Wright. Thank you all for being here and for lending your continued support. I'd also like to recognize Newcastle County Councilman Jay Street, who I see in the building as well. Thank you for being here, sir. And State Representative Charles Potter, who's in the back and also represents the Wilmington Education Improvement Commission. I might also add that former City Council President Norman Griffiths is also present. So thank you all for being here. I'd also like to recognize several commission members. With me tonight is Tizzy Lockman to my left, who's our Vice Chair, Red Clay Parent, and the Director of the PACE program at Christina Cultural Arts Center. Dr. Dan Rich, who is our Policy Director for the Commission. Harry Ellen Minahan, who is the President of the Christina School District. Harry Ellen, if you just raise your hand. Michelle Taylor of United Way, who's also in the back and chairs our Meeting the Needs of Students in Poverty, along with the Education Czar for the city, Jackie Jenkins. And my good friend, Dr. Adriana Bohm, who is also on the Red Clay School Board, but was a member of the Wilmington Education Advisory Committee, the predecessor group to the Improvement Commission. Tonight is our real opportunity for us to give you very quickly an abbreviated summary of our plans with respect to school governance. I should say at the top, and I think I've said this many times, but I'd like to say it again, we all know that simply redrawing the lines is not the only answer to student achievement. And in fact, if that's all we did, we know we would not be accomplishing much. But we do think this is a first step. In many respects, we believe it's the price of admission to the more substantive issues relative to education for Wilmington City children. I might also add that we will take question and answer. This is separate from the public hearing period, which will occur immediately following this presentation. We will have Q&A. Elizabeth Berlin, who is in the audience, will be going around with sign-up sheets. So as you think of questions as we go through this presentation, just go to Elizabeth and she will certainly be able to put you on the sign-up sheet and hopefully have a robust discussion. I've also seen, I don't want to miss anybody, I've also seen Councilman Trippy Congo just walk in the room, as well as Councilman Darius Brown. Again, thank you all for joining us. I normally start these presentations back in 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. I do that because I believe that was the initial moment for public education reform in Delaware. I think all of you may know that 1954 there were several cases in the Supreme Court ruling that were from Delaware, and in Delaware those were the only cases where the court ruled in favor of the plaintiff. I like to say Delaware set the precedent for Brown. No Delaware, no Brown. Unfortunately, though, Delaware did not implement any parts of Brown for 20 years after the Supreme Court ruling. And when they did implement, it was only by federal court order, which has been the history of public education reform in Delaware. Very little, if anything at all, from the Delaware General Assembly or the governor, and lots of court-mandated intervention from the federal courts. Tizzy, next slide. These are the numbers I'd like to leave you with tonight. There are 135,000 public school children across the state of Delaware, 135,000. 11,500 of them are in the city of Wilmington. That's less than 10%. If you have a calculator, it's actually 8%. 23 different governing units trying to manage those 11,500 City of Wilmington children, 4 school districts, traditional school districts, 1 VOTEC district, 13 charters, the State Board of Education, the Department of Education, and several other units. 23. That number 0 means 0 unified plans for educating those children. 0 unified plans for educating those children, which has been the history of fragmentation and dysfunction for Wilmington City kids in particular. Next slide. This chart just tells you by one measure, but I would argue by any measure you could think of, here's the deal. There are a set of performance measures by district that include all kids in public schools. They perform at one level. Low-income kids across all districts across the state perform at another level. City of Wilmington kids perform at a lower level. Low-income City of Wilmington kids perform at the lowest level. I would argue that measure, this is potentially, specifically performance measures by test scores. I would argue you could find that index regardless of any measure you looked at. It's problematic, significant, and systemic in public education reform in Delaware generally and Wilmington in particular. Next slide. This is the history of public education reform in the city of Wilmington. It starts in 1897. I won't go through this. In fact, I'm sure you can't even see all of the things that happened here, but just note, again, 1954 ruling, 1974 the U.S. District Court decides to implement an Education Advancement Act that they declare unconstitutional. 1978, busing is implemented, and de facto or de jure, that is the law of the land for the last 40 years. There have been other moments in time. I might add that 1995 was the advent of charter schools, and also a significant court case in the Coalition to Save Our Children. 1999/2001 was the Neighborhood Schools Act, which suggested that kids should go to schools close to their home and had significant implications for racial segregation in that regard. From 2001 till now, there have been five reports that are dealing or attempting to deal with Wilmington education. I would argue that none of those reports are all that different from one another, including the one that we produced last April. The difference, though, is there had been no action on any of those reports in that intervening 15 years until the last General Assembly, when the Delaware General Assembly passed two significant bills. The first was Senate Bill 122, which is the redistricting bill. And the second was HB 148, which is the establishment of the commission, both of which I'll talk about here momentarily. Next slide. As we started this work last September with the Wilmington Education Advisory Committee, one of the things we noticed early was a salient point. Many people think low income and immediately think City of Wilmington. Here's the fact: 51% of all public school children in the state of Delaware are low income. I'll repeat that. 51% of all public school children in the state of Delaware are low income. So while there is an acute problem in the city of Wilmington, it's not exclusive to Wilmington. And in fact, there are many parts of Newcastle County, the western parts of Sussex, Dover, and other areas that are significantly beleaguered by that problem. This is just another indice that we think is relevant. So I told you that the problem is not acute to Wilmington. We have this laid out by both county and city. So the incidence of childhood poverty across the state, you'll see 33.7% in Wilmington, but Dover's not far behind. You break that out by county, the highest incidence of childhood poverty is actually in Sussex County. So we believe that our recommendations, while specific to Wilmington, are not exclusive to Wilmington, and we believe that dealing with low-income children by providing the resources that they deserve is a statewide problem that needs to be attended to. The challenge of governance, I'm sure, is not surprising to you. I said we had 4 traditional school districts and 1 VOTEC district in the city of Wilmington. Christina School District is 1 out of 4 of 14,000 in the country that are discontinuous, which effectively means it starts in one area, is divided by 16 or 20 miles of highway, and then begins again in the city of Wilmington. Again, it is 1 of 4 out of 14,000 in the country that are that way. Colonial School District has about 400 or so City of Wilmington students, 200 of which choice to other school districts or charter schools. The 178 or so that are remaining actually have their closest school 6 miles and a waterway away. So Colonial School District, no schools in the city and very little City of Wilmington children. And Christina School District, one of 4 out of 14,000 that are divided in this way. This is our commission. Again, I said House Bill 148 established this commission last summer. You'll see that it is made up of a very diverse set of educators, community leaders, parents, and even a couple of students. I would add that this is just the commission. We have 5 other committees. Those committees comprise upwards of about 100 citizens across our community. I would say here that since we've been operating both as the Women's Education Advisory Committee and the Women's Education Improvement Commission, we believe we've been the most transparent civic organization in a generation around here. We have 2,000 members on our Facebook page. We've had dozens of town halls. Dan Rich and I have met with quite literally hundreds of leaders across this community, and we continue to do so in these kinds of forums. As I said, we have 5 committees on the commission. First is the Redistricting Committee. That is chaired by Dr. Henry Harper, who was a former superintendent of Appoquinimink School District, and Dr. Joe Pica, who's a former president of the State Board of Education. We have a Charter and District Collaboration Committee that's chaired by Aretha Miller, who's the CEO at the Community Education Building, and Dr. Eve Buckley. Funding Student Success is chaired by Jill Flore, who's the CFO of the Red Clay Consolidated School District, and Mike Jackson, who's the Deputy Comptroller in the Office of Management and Budget. Meeting the needs of students, of low-income students, that's chaired, as I said earlier, by Michelle Taylor, who's the President and CEO of the United Way, the former Chief Judge of the Family Court, Chanley Kuhn, and as I said, the Education Czar for the City of Wilmington, Dr. Jackie Jenkins. And then our Parent, Educator, and Community Engagement Committee is chaired by Yvonne Johnson, a very activist Red Clay parent and a member of the National Board of the PTA, and Chandra Pitts, who's the President and CEO of One Village Alliance. Here are our deadlines. We've talked specifically, and you've heard a lot of reporting about redistricting in specific. We released our draft that I hope all of you have on November 19th, and we plan to submit, pending approval from the Commission, that draft to the State Board of Education on December 17th, 2015, which is Thursday. The State Board has said they will act on our plan as a package. That's important to note. We're presenting a full package around school governance to the State Board of Education, and they will have to vote that package up or down, which is to say they cannot disaggregate that package. They have to vote it as a package. If, in fact, they vote it down, they have said to us they will give us reasons why and give us an opportunity to resubmit. We would hope to do that in 2 to 3 weeks after that vote. And it's important to note this last date, which is the authority of the State Board under the provisions of SB 122 terminates. So effectively, the State Board has the opportunity to redraw the lines until March 31st, 2016, and then that authority goes away. If, in fact, they voted up, and it is still subject to a joint resolution by the Delaware General Assembly and the governor, and what we believe will be a significant number of fiscal notes attached to implementing the plan. Our recommendations. We believe that schools and students served by Christina in the city of Wilmington should be assigned to Red Clay. It's worth noting that both school boards, both Red Clay and Christina, support this action. It's also worth noting that by so doing, more than 50% of all students in the city of Wilmington would be in Red Clay, making Red Clay a significant metropolitan district. Second, all students can choose to remain in their district in their 2017-2018 school until their program is complete. So we've tried to do this with little disruption to students and families. The Christina and Red Clay school districts will continue to collaborate on transition planning, and there is a plan set forth. Many people believe that if this goes forward, it would be implemented immediately. There's actually a 3-year transition plan toward that implementation. The Brandywine, Colonial, and Newcastle County Vo-Tech school district will continue to serve City of Wilmington students. I'm sure that'll be a topic of conversation tonight. The only thing I would say is we've asked both Brandywine and Colonial to express a specific strategic interest in serving their city kids that will be included in our plan. So you see 2016-2018 2017 is meant to be a planning stage for us. It will include some test and learning, particularly around funding. We would like to change the unit count to reflect schools with high concentrations of students in poverty, English language learners in the affected districts, and then move that out across the Newcastle County districts and ultimately statewide. You'll see that there's a transition stage in 2017, 2018, and then implementation again begins in the fall of 2018 if this is approved. Our funding recommendations, I've talked a little bit about this. We are one of 5 states in the country that don't account for any funding allocation for English language learners, even though those learners are the fastest fastest growing student population in the state. And we are one of 15 that don't account for weighted funding for low-income students. And it's important, we believe, that this is a part of our strategy. In fact, we've said publicly that if no funding is provided, we would not go forward with this plan. We've also asked for some transition funding to do some necessary assessments as we go forward. We believe that we need to continue to sustain an investment and accelerate the improvements in early childhood education. And we need to strengthen the revenue base supporting public education at both the state and local levels. That includes reassessing the tax pools, property reassessment, which hasn't been done in Newcastle County since 1983, in Kenton since 1986, and in Sussex since 1972, and continuing to do that in a thoughtful way. In fact, we believe that there are many Delawareans that are paying more than their fair share now, and we believe this must be done immediately. The punchline question here is, will redistricting be implemented even if the necessary funding is not provided? The answer is no. If the necessary funding is not provided as confirmed by the Commission in consultation with the affected districts at each milestone, I've told you about the 3 years of implementation, then the State Board shall suspend the timetable for implementing until the resources are provided. It's worth noting that we have outlined in our plan that suspension goes away in the fall of 2018. So it's important that the funding come or nothing else will go forward. What are our measures of success? Many people have asked us what this all means. And as I've said, redistricting is not our only issue. It is our first issue. And I would argue our entry point for other more salient issues. Just as a point of clarity, Dan Rich from the University of Delaware's Institute of Public Administration, for the first time, disaggregated student performance by geography. So for many years, generations, the Department of Education was unable and or unwilling to disaggregate student information by geography, which means we knew how low-income students were doing, but we had no idea how City of Wilmington students were doing. We plan to offer that evaluation every year based on measures that we determine with the help of the Commission and other affected community members. It's also worth noting that in addition to improving student outcomes, which I think is important to all of us, we want to look at increased rates of attendance, reduced disciplinary incidents, increased graduation rates, college and workforce readiness, and improved rate of successful employment for City of Wilmington students. I would say here that these aren't qualitative standards. These are all quantitative that would be produced in an annual report that would be submitted to the State Board, the General Assembly, and the Governor, as well as our entire community. This is our logic model. Again, if you think we're emphasizing that redistricting is not our whole plan, you're right. The intention for us is to make sure folks know that we are very focused on meeting Wilmington student needs, funding student success. You'll see the inputs noted therein and the outcomes that we hope come forward in the blue. The Commission is up and running by law until 2021. So hopefully you will see one of many plans each year focused on all of these things that come with legislative priorities that we'll be active in, as well as funding supports as appropriate. Resources. I said we've been fairly deliberate in trying to gain citizen input. We can never do enough, so I would urge you, if you have places where you think this presentation would be helpful, to call us. We come at request at any time You can monitor our progress on solutionsfordelawareschools.com. You can contact us at solutionsfordelawareschools@gmail.com, or you can call us at 302-385-6206. I've also said that we have a Facebook page that is 2,000 members strong, and that Facebook page is Solutions for Wilmington Schools. So with that, we're happy to take some questions for the next 40 minutes or so, and then we'll have our formal public hearing. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to call you by name, and when we call you by name, if you could come up to this podium here to our left to state your question into the mic. I believe we have Beatrice Dixon has a question.
I am here tonight after having been here quite a few times. And I can only quote the sister of Louis L. Redding, whose statue stands outside, and saying, "For the parents and the citizens of the city of Wilmington, our souls cry out." I am not sure that this reiteration of the several reiterations that we've had in educational reform is going to be any better than the last, because I am not sure that there is the political will to make this situation right. And until that happens, we are going to continue to go through this revolving door of yet another commission. But my two questions are: governance. Should this plan go through, how would then the board structure work, one? And two, most critical, we currently have a PPST system to qualify teachers, and for 37 years, those teachers who have passed the PPST have produced these low-income, non-performing academic students. So will the PPST be reviewed as to its efficacy for providing teachers who are reaching the students that we are now talking about transferring into yet another governance structure?
Dr. Rich, I'm going to ask you to take the second question. I'll take the first question.
You want to do it first? Yeah, so I think we feel very strongly that the most critical factor in the schools is the quality of the teachers, supported effectively by the other kinds of resources that are needed for them to engage their students in learning. We do not believe that exists now. There's no disagreement.
So the PPST in your
So we have to change that structure. And to do it, we need to create both the incentives and the support, the resources, to make sure that we allow the districts, enable them, as well as charters. I mean, they're all Wilmington kids, to not only attract, but as you, I'm sure, well know, retain top quality teachers in the schools in which our students need them most. We have a tremendous turnover rate, burnout rate for teachers in urban schools. So it's one thing to say we need to bring them in, but the other is we need to provide the supports that good teachers require because they're committed to their students.
Well, I'm talking more about not necessarily culturally competent. I am talking about, we had Future Teachers of America when I was in high school. What about the young teachers or the young people who are currently in school who want to become teachers? What kind of support are they being provided so that they can be channeled into the system? You see, we keep talking about reform. My perception is that the answer to this problem, we've already had the answer. And if anyone will go back to see the Howard High School of 1867 and 1927 that Pierre DuPont provided,
Yeah.
and the quality of the teachers
Yeah.
who didn't have to be culturally
I agree.
competent because they knew the children. They lived in the community with the children. They went to church with the children. They shopped with the children. We had the most competent and qualified teachers in all the 17 districts from Wilmington. Those teachers had to sit out at the inception of this process
Yeah.
3 years while everyone else was leveled up in salary. Everyone who didn't have the classroom management experience, everyone who didn't have the educational degrees that they had, everyone who didn't have the empathy for the students that they had, got their salaries. And as soon as those salaries were leveled up, all 4 systems began to push those culturally competent, relevant, and also successful teachers out of the system.
Yeah.
So maybe if we go back and grab what we've had in the past, we can repeat some of the futures for the children that those teachers were able to give the students of the past. Now, the governance issue,
Yeah, two things on that. In our Wilmington Education Advisory Committee's initial report, we talked about governance in 2 ways. First, we believe that there should be more Wilmington representation on any school board serving the city of Wilmington. We haven't prescribed that directly in our report, but we'll certainly be advocating for it as these changes go forward.
Well,
The second and most important probably is, again, in our report, we recommend that the Office of Public Policy and Education be formed in the city of Wilmington, and that and Nnamdi Chukwochu, who's also on our commission, was the key recommender there, that would be a city-run, city-operated office that would be able to do a couple of things. One, we believe engage parents in a much more meaningful way than they are today in school, and also try to hold both the traditionals and the charters more accountable for integrating around one unified plan. So we have not reflected that in this particular report because this is the first of many, but they are in our initial comprehensive report, and the recommendations we'll take over the next 5 years.
well, if you keep the current governing structure of 7 board members and expect that only 1 seat would be lodged in Wilmington, and Wilmington has to surrender its children to that system, which has been very ineffective in the past, I think you can really not expect to get a lot of parental participation because we have to pay the taxes, but we have no representation in the process. The process has historically kept City of Wilmington residents out of the decision-making process, and now we surrender to them more students, and we're not expected to get a larger degree of control within that governing body?
Yeah, just to be clear, we don't disagree with that point. We think there should be more local control, both as it relates to board representation and its development of the Office of Public Policy and Education. Both those things we believe are important in this process. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. Just a reminder, if anyone's just come in to see our staff person, Elizabeth, if you'd like to sign in and ask a question during the Q&A. Next up, we have Councilman Jay Street with a question.
I'd like to ask questions as relates to what's recommended in Colonial. Is the commission and those who agreed on the report familiar with the Neighborhood School Act?
Yes.
Is the commission familiar with the matter of Christina versus the City of Wilmington, wherein the Chancery Court found that Christina's efforts to close schools in the city and transport them out of the city was a violation of the Neighborhood School Act?
Yes.
So why then would it be acceptable, and why would you as a commission recommend that something that you should know full well is probably a violation of the law why would that be included in this recommendation? And that's not consistent with the book that you put out in April 2015 prior to the legislation being sponsored and passed.
Question, Councilman Street?
The question is,
Okay.
why would those who made the final recommendation support and recommend something that you should know full well is probably in violation of existing state law?
I'd start this way. The Colonial matter has been a tough one for us. The Colonial School District voted unanimously to keep their kids in the city of Wilmington. We disagree with that assertion. Had several meetings with them as to why we thought that was inappropriate. They did not relent. We came to an agreement that if they decided to keep those kids, they would have to show more than good faith in serving them in a different way than they have in the past. I'd also say that the final recommendations are to be voted on tomorrow, so the commission has not yet formally voted, but the draft does recommend the current situation.
That being the case, then doesn't that make Colonial, who only serves 178 city children, in charge of, or quasi in charge of the education of all city children?
No, that's not my belief, no.
And you don't have any concern that the commission may move forward tomorrow and pass something that is probably in violation of the law, its spirit and intention, and been tried successfully by the city in court?
I have significant concern about Colonial's decision, but we have gone forward with this based on what we believe is a good faith effort that we'll monitor consistently over the life of the commission.
Okay, is the commission aware that over the last 30 years, the Colonials received over $100 million from the other three school districts to educate approximately 200 kids a year?
We're not aware of that specific figure, no. We do believe they're a net provider.
If you take 34 years times $3 million a year, it comes out to a little over $100 million. My point being, the children, would you agree with me that even with that $100 million, Colonial has yet to do anything of substance as relates to improving the educational success of the 178 to 200 children that it serves in Riverside?
I would agree with that, and with this caveat that I don't believe any district is any better than any other in that regard in the city of Wilmington.
Isn't it the fact, though, that the other districts have given Colonial $1 million a year that they could have otherwise spent on their own children, and Colonial's yet still $100 million later hasn't been any more successful, and yet they want to continue in violation of the Neighborhood School Act? Let me cut straight to the chase. If you think that it's going to be okay to continue to bus those children out of the city of Wilmington, past schools in Christina now and Red Clay in the future without a legal challenge, you're sadly mistaken.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, we've got Jerry Velasquez.
Good evening, everybody. The report states that redistricting must be accompanied by resources needed to better serve students, and specifically that the resources needed to fully address the need of low-income students, English language learners, and students at risk. While the report states that initial funding should be provided in the Red Clay District and to Wilmington schools within the Christiana School District, there is no mention of charter schools in the city of Wilmington. Yet in 2012, Delaware ranked among among the third in the states with the percentage of percentages of students in charter schools. There are over 11,500 students in Wilmington. 73% of them go to traditional schools, 21% go to charter schools. When you look at English and math scores of traditional public schools, they have about 67 and 62% proficiency. Charter schools have 68 and 65% proficiencies. When you look at low income, the traditional schools are producing about 54 and 48% proficiencies for English and math. Charter schools are producing 63 and 59%. For low income students, it's 42 and 37% in English and math. Charter schools are at 56 and 53% on the average proficiency. So I guess my question is this: why wouldn't charter schools be included in this report?
I'll turn over to Dr. Rich in a second, but I'd say redistricting first was our first foray, and it was meant to deal with traditional schools first. On your funding point, we do believe that and are recommending that over time, the unit counts for English language learners and schools with high concentrations of poverty not only be extended to the other districts, but also to charter schools. We just are taking a phased-in approach in that regard.
But when you look at even the funding issue, Mr. Allen, when you look at the fact that the House Bill 30 and House Bill 117 are right now been tabled,
Yeah.
okay, it raises a level of concern that
Sure.
almost mirrors what's been happening historically with the way the state of Delaware has been managing education, which we as a state have been the slowest to adopt best practices. So again, how do we in the public arena help to support a report that doesn't include 20% of the educational system that's out there, does not address the fact that here is a plan that has no funding in place right now? I would suggest, I would offer to you that any plan needs stakeholder support and approval, needs resources, and needs an executable plan. I'm just concerned whether this plan has all of that embodied in it. And if it doesn't, then wouldn't you consider the plan to be less than a good plan to go forward?
Yeah, I would agree with you, but on balance, I've said many times that if the funding is not provided, that the plan should not go forward. And that is not only rhetorical flourishing, that is actually in the resolution we'll provide to the State Board.
So if I can just add to that.
Sure.
A couple of things. Well, first of all, the plan, the overall framework is in the Wilmington Education Advisory Committee's proposal on strengthening Wilmington education. And the framework that is described there is the same framework as you can see in all of you in the executive summary. And as you will recognize, redistricting is simply one component of that framework. So this one component requires a comprehensive transition, resource, and implementation plan. And we have that. It's about 200 pages and maybe 700 pages in appendices when we're done. That's one piece. That's the first 4 months of the work of the commission, which goes on for 5 years. And it's clear from the advisory committees that charter schools are very important, both to the issue and the challenge we face, and also to meeting that challenge. So everything that Tony Allen mentioned, I think, is true. Let me also say that I think that just as we disaggregate for districts with regard to Wilmington students, we should disaggregate for charters. And when you disaggregate for charters, the picture is different for Wilmington students, just as it is for districts. Okay, no. There are some doing better than others, so taking the averages, okay, doesn't really quite cut it. So we need to do both, right? We need to apply the same standard. So in a redistricting plan, our case, if I can just two other pieces, our case is that the rollout of support should surround the initiative that you're proposing to undertake initially, which is this redistricting process, and then roll out as rapidly as it can to all schools, not only in Newcastle County, but through the state. In fact, what we propose is that this funding has to happen next year, okay, to get us started on the process, even though the actual movement of schools and students would not take place until September of 2018. So at the time in which it does take place, it will impact all of the districts and the charters that you're referencing.
And I
And
guess-
can I just add one other
Yes,
piece?
sir.
Okay, I do want to point out that in 60 years, more than 60 years now, since Brown, that last summer was the first time that government officials in the state of Delaware, at the state level, took any action to strengthen Wilmington education. So if you ask why we're a bit hopeful, we believe there is a commitment and a momentum now that has not been present for more than half a century.
And I'm not sure how we would gauge their commitment, but again, I'm just concerned about the fact that here is a report that stands on three legs. It's talking about we need to meet Wilmington student needs. We need to have appropriate student funding, and we need to create a governance, as you're saying. So here we are in the city of Wilmington, divided among 3 school districts, quite a few charter schools, as you clearly have pointed out here, 23 governing authorities, and yet we have no collaboration among them. So how does putting together a plan that excludes 20% of the educational system in the city of Wilmington foster anything else but a plan that, again, goes to foster the historical presence that has happened, where the district arrangements have been less than favorable to the education of black students?
Yeah, I hear your point. It's well taken. I would just say that we're not excluding them. If you read the Strengthening Women's Education full report that we issued in April, we have a full-throated analysis on charter schools. We call for deeper collaboration with them, have been called to question in that regard, are certainly promoting the Office of Public Policy and Education in the city of Wilmington, and that they would have some responsibility for both integration within charter and from charter to district. So while this is one of many plans over the next 5 years, we believe this is the first pass, and I think you will see ongoing plans, legislative priorities, and related fiscal notes that will occur right through 2021. So we don't believe we're excluding charter schools at all.
And I'll go along with that. I'm just going to say the following also. When you look at these timelines, okay, we only have but so many years in which to take students, okay, from K to 8, okay, to develop them. K through 3 are the most critical, okay? 4 through 8 is what's going to prepare them for high school and colleges. So when we start talking about plans that take 4 or 5 years to develop, we are losing an entire generation of students.
Yeah, and I would only,
And I'm just concerned that this report, while I think it was a great exercise in what you put together, I think it's a great plan, Alan. I think the timetable is quite elongated in a state that has a history of over 40 years of failing the students most in need. I would like to see compression forthwith.
So let me speak to the question of compression. If we compressed and it was approved this year through all the stages, then the school districts involved would have less than 3 months to make critical decisions on the configuration of schools, the supports, the identification of the principals, the instructional programs that will be in those schools. We don't believe that's enough time for us to actually identify what's needed to make a difference in the schools going forward as compared to what we've had in the past. That was the rationale for the extension, that we need to really do things that are different for our students and not simply change the sign on the door from one district to another and consider that we're making progress. So we can't have it both ways. We need to get to the substance of the matter, right? We have said, you heard Tony say it tonight, that if all we did was change district boundaries, we've said it's not worth doing. You need to make these other changes as well, and that does take time in order to do it in a way that's not disruptive to children, to their parents, and to educators.
When you look at corporate America, okay, and their ability to turn on a dime, okay, that is something that the educational system also has to do, and it's been demonstrated time and time again that system that cannot turn on a dime is scheduled to continue to do the same inadequate job that it's doing currently.
your points are well taken.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comments and questions. Okay, so we're going to have to switch gears in about 10 minutes, so we have 3 more questions. Matthew Meyer?
Can I just do a question check? Are there any other questions out there?
Oh, okay, great.
Okay.
4
Well,
more questions.
We'll be sure to take your questions as well.
Good evening. My name is Matthew Meyer. I'm a resident of the city of Wilmington. I also am a former attorney at the Educational Opportunities Section of the Civil Rights Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and a former teacher at Prestige Academy right here in Wilmington. I'm a certified middle school math teacher. There are 3 characteristics that data shows consistently produce higher quality outcomes for low-income students. Number 1 is the recruitment, training, and retention of school leaders. Number 2 is the recruitment, training, and retention of high-quality teachers. And number 3 is kids going to integrated schools. My question is about the third point, that what I don't see in any of the materials you produced, and I haven't read every single word, so it may be in there, but has anyone looked at what impact this plan would have in terms of children in the city of Wilmington going to integrated schools? This whole process started, as you said, in 1954, and the main driver of the policies was the desegregation of schools, making sure our kids went to desegregated schools. And I know that the political winds have turned against busing and some of the tools used to make schools desegregated and integrate them. But I was wondering if there was any look at how this whole thing would impact that.
Yeah, again, I'll let Dr. Rich answer in a moment. But if you do peruse the April report, you'll note that we projected what the changes would be racially by English language learners and special education needs. The differences are marginal in that regard, and it goes to several points. The first is too many people equate low income and African American and Latino with the city of Wilmington. There are large pockets of African American and Latino students throughout Newcastle County, as I'm sure you know. And in fact, in Delaware, a large proportion of African Americans are in the county, not in the city. So the demographics have changed since 1954 quite considerably. And if you overlay that with the proportion of low-income students across the state, it's not surprising to me that the demographics haven't changed substantively in that regard.
So one of the reasons we are advocating for the development and extension of a larger metropolitan district into a leadership role as the next step, not the end point, but as the next step, is precisely because it would be more expansive and more diverse in its composition. The test, of course, will be in regard to the actual configuration of schools, feeder patterns, and attendance patterns. That'll be determined next year, as it always is determined by the districts working, and the commission will work with them to do that. So it's absolutely a fair question. What we do know, based on what you referenced, is that in fact that the structure put in place to achieve a certain integration of schools through busing has failed to meet that standard consistently. And then in fact we've moved away from that standard, and only state policies that have been taken instead of reinforcing it have actually diluted that standard over time, including some that were even referenced this evening. So you're absolutely right. It's a challenge. We know that that does make a difference. The first 2 items also make a critical difference, and we're hoping that the changes we're proposing will be helpful in that regard. But we certainly need to look through the process at each stage and evaluate whether we're really making progress, and not just assume that because we started it, that it produces the outcomes.
Yeah, because I mean, as is often the case in educational reform, the outcomes are not always predictable from the outset. So things like charter schools and kids choicing out
Absolutely.
could dramatically impact how this.
Absolutely. Yeah, we agree.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question.
So much. Alethea Smith-Tucker?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alethea Smith-Tucker. I'm a community member and a parent of 2 City Wilmington children. Hi. Dr. Allen, you specifically said that redistricting is the price of admission. I would like to know why that was the specific approach to, as a benchmark for moving forward. Why that model?
Is that your
That's
the
one question.
Okay. My sense is if you look at what's happened in public education reform over the last 60 years, very little has been able to be put forward. And we think that redrawing the lines is much more, regardless of what the concerns, is much more a simple matter than it is a complex matter. And our bet has been, if we can get over the simple matter with respect to redrawing the lines and making it more clear that we can hold folks accountable for the large proportions of low-income students in the city of Wilmington, we would be much more successful with the much more salient, educationally substantive issues that we outline in a full-throated way in our report in April.
So if I understand you, to echo what you're saying, are you saying that just to have a more streamlined governing body for Wilmington makes it easier to then enact change? Is that the
My sense is at the district level, and I would argue at the charter level to a lesser degree, but certainly significantly, the motto has been we're all accountable, which in our view means no one's accountable. So our ability to put the majority of City of Wilmington students in one place and begin to hold that district, in particular Red Clay, more accountable for meeting the needs of our students is an important step in that regard.
Okay. And I also want to know, what about this plan, as it stands right now, would motivate people to, specifically the state governing body, to sign off on this plan? Because I don't really see any substance in regards to specifically how education is going to change at the student and at the school level. And basically, you're talking about logistics and governing bodies. And so can you convince me?
Probably not. I've talked to you before.
In 5 minutes or less.
Listen, I am.
Yeah, so,
I want to say I appreciate all the
Sure.
work that's being
No
done,
worries.
but I really want to understand what are the specific details that would motivate the state to sign off on this when there has been a history of so much negligence and avoidance of education, period. I want to know, where's the meat?
Yeah, and again, I would argue the meat is largely in our report that we issued in April. And more clearly, with respect to political will of the state, while we'll see what happens in the next session of the General Assembly, the fact that they did approve 2 significant bills around this issue for the first time in 60 years, and there were only 3 no votes in the passage of those bills, we believe gives us hope that something can be done for the first time in a very long time. I mean, that we have never gotten as far as passing law on this issue.
Okay.
Yep.
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead.
One
Take
last
your time.
question. You had mentioned measures of success. And there were very high-level measures of success that I'm sure I could find on any of the district's websites. Parent engagement, graduation success. I mean, that is no different than any other plan that I've seen on any other website regarding school education. Specifically, what are some of the things that are outcomes from those other committees that will help advance those measures?
Say it one more time, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Say it one more time, I'm sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
during this whole commission, there were several committees. Parent engagement.
Oh, okay.
So what are those
yeah,
specific?
they're in there. Yeah, if you look at the milestones and measures of success section of the plan, you won't appreciate it from the
I didn't see any
from the executives.
specifics.
Well, there's a whole section on it. And basically what it does is it reflects the dimensions that would really come from other committees, because it starts really in early childhood and the readiness to learn of children when they arrive. I mean, we've said that that's a critical need. It works through not only what they do with regard to academic achievement, but also social emotional growth. We have said that what we need to be adopting in our state, we don't have it now. It's another issue related to the lack of will, is we don't have a developmental model for children driving the arrangement of the supports and even the expenditure of the funds that we make. We spend a lot of money, but we don't spend it necessarily in this way. All of those are milestones and measures of progress that relate not only to the reduction of outcomes we don't want, like suspensions right, and expulsions, but also dimensions that we do want, which is that individuals, children can make progress and be supported and surrounded by the kinds of services and individuals that they need at each stage. A lot of the work that'll be needed in this area will be from these other committees. That's exactly the case, yeah.
The only thing I'd add is I just want to dispel the notion that our work ends March 31st. Our work ends June 30, 2021. It isn't that there were committees. There are committees that are working very hard on all these issues. And I might add, we'll be reporting every year on the progress of Wilmington City children for the first time in our state's history. So I think there's going to be lots of opportunity for us to evolve and learn in this process. That's why I think your input's really valuable. And we do believe that our measures of success will hold not only the schools accountable, but also hold the commission accountable for the recommendations we've outlined.
You did mention transparency, and what I'd like to say in regards to those committees and their ongoing is that we'd like to televise, we'd like a YouTube channel of all those, all the things that's happening.
Oh. Thank you. Good one. Okay. So we're going to, 2 more questions as quickly as we can. We don't want to hold up the hearing. We've got Timothy Crawlday. Not to rush us.
Hey, good evening.
Good evening.
Some of the questions I had were kind of addressed through the charter school question and even the previous person who came up. But I want to ask some questions specific to the Brandywine School District. One of the concerns I've had throughout the process is that while it's called the Wilmington Education Improvement Committee or whatnot, it seems like the Brandywine School District, for whatever reason, is kind of, when the outside looking in, when you talk about the actual reforms being made, although that district, I believe, has around 30 to 40% of city students within that district. So I guess my first question is isn't the Brandywine School District a more substantive part of the reforms that are being created, particularly since it seems to be an emphasis on streamlining some of the districts or having a lot of the city kids within one district, i.e. Ware Clay. Why hasn't Brandywine been included, it seems like?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Mr. Crawley. I would say the question is more clearly directed to Brandywine, but I'll give it an answer. We've asked Brandywine to play a more significant role in the process. They are at the table. The president of the Brandywine School Board is the commissioner. The superintendent is very involved, and we have active working committees of Brandywine officials. But they have resolved for the moment, particularly on governance, I want to be clear here, specifically to governance, to retain their current boundaries. So we did not outline a recommendation for them to do anything different in the report, but we've always wanted them to take more of a visible role in that regard. And I would argue that particular conversation, in the same way that we've had with Colonial, is likely not over, but it's certain that's something that we are continuing to press on. But to your point about them being more involved in all the other reforms noted in the agenda, they are at the table, and I'd argue in a significant way.
Notwithstanding what you said about the district superintendent being involved, I mean, one of your first comments was that's really on Brandywine, which suggests to me that they've taken a position not to be as engaged.
With respect to redistricting.
Right. So again, I guess in terms of the committee's role, if it's somewhat independent of the districts to what they want or what their desires are, I guess why is the committee didn't just take a position, well, again, if this is what's best for city students, it seemed to me the committee, my question would be, why wouldn't the committee take a more independent position from what that district has desired, if in fact the belief is that these things are to help city kids?
Yeah, and Dan might respond more clearly here, but we deliberated on the issue at length, both with respect to Brandywine and Colonial, and ultimately decided that in order to move this forward, which is important, to begin a process that has not begun for the last 60 years, we would take this approach, and to the extent that we could come back to it at a later time, we would.
So I just add that the step that's being proposed as the initial step, not the only step, but the initial step, is quite a major change. At the result, at the outcome of the redistricting we're proposing, there will, for the first time, be a school district with a primary responsibility for the majority of public education students in the city of Wilmington. That's a large step. It's not the end step. Second is that back when we were working on the report for the advisory committee, even before the commission was established, we affirmed that we expected Brandywine to remain a part of the educational process within the city, that it would be one of the core districts. And so a key element here now is how Brandywine will work with Red Clay and to the extent that Colonial stays, and with charter schools, because we need to work out not only just the streamlining, but also the kind of collaboration across units. They've committed to us that they're engaged and willing to participate in that process, and that's what we're going to work on.
All right. Just one other quick question. You know, you had the chart at the beginning that talked about the number of students in the 23 districts, I think, and down to zero. So my question in relation to charter schools, I mean, I think there's a general consensus that one of the benefits of some of the charter schools, particularly local ones who have had some higher test scores, is that they do have more freedom, that they're able to implement some things from an academic standpoint, parent engagement and the like, that maybe some of the public schools haven't. And so I just wanted to, if you could just maybe clarify, articulate a little bit more about the collaboration that you want, or not that you want, but what you envision as far as what the committee envisions as far as that collaboration. Because my concern would be, again, and my mother-in-law ran a charter school in Philadelphia. You know, again, the benefits they have is that they aren't like the public schools and some of the things that they can do. And so how do you, maybe your vision is just something broader. I just wanted you to speak more about what you anticipate, what you see as the relationship in terms of, you know, a plan or the like.
So it's a good question. Two factoids. First, the National Association of Charter Authorizers, which is sort of the gold standard for charter schools, suggests that all charters should be authorized by local school districts. And in fact, 90% of all charters across the country are authorized by local school districts. In Delaware, it's completely the opposite. 90% are authorized by the state. We believe that creates friction between districts and charters, natural friction, you might posit. The other thing I think is important to note in that regard is when the charter law was introduced in Delaware, the idea was that they would be these petri dish learning environments where we would share best practices between charters and between the districts so that you could scale up those best practices throughout the system. That scaling up is the thing that has not taken place, and we believe that has a lot to do with the fact that many districts don't see charters as competition, and competition that is unwanted in that regard, and many charters themselves, between charters, don't work all that effectively together. There are pockets where that happens, but it's not universal. The other piece here, I believe, and Dan is chomping at the bit to add on, the other thing I think is important here, when you think about the successor charters, they vary in their success. And there, in my view, is not a particularly collaborative nature. When one fails, that everybody else comes running to their support, which we think is significant. The last factoid I'd say is charters are important in our work. You will see that in a full-throated way next year, and they're important if for no other reason but this. We project that in the next 5 years, 60% of all City of Wilmington students could actually be in charter schools. So it's not something that we're leaving on the table relative to best practice, scaling, and collaboration.
We have a fractured public education system. We have three systems, parts of it, that operate largely independently from one another. One segment is traditional districts. We've got 4 of those working. We've got a VOTEC district. It operates in the world on its own. And then we've got, depending on what week we count, we've got 12, 13 charter schools in Wilmington and others, and they are another system, right? So we've got 2 problems. One is that the units within each of these systems don't work so well with each other. They don't scale up. When we have successes, we don't scale up the success. As Tony said, that was the whole idea of innovation. And they don't connect with each other, right? So we've got all of this to do. Streamlining districts is just one piece. We proposed that we had to overcome this fracturing. We need one public education system that serves all the kids and does so in terms of being able to improve their performance. Of all the charters that serve the city of Wilmington, charters statewide, there are 2 or 3 that have performances that are above the state average for traditional schools. That's not an indictment of charters, not an indictment of traditional schools. These are challenging conditions. And at this point in time, it's fair that we believe none of the system is really up to the standards that we want them to be in terms of generating the outcomes for the students. So we're with you. We need to get the players to work with each other. But we've had decades and decades where they've been actually facilitated to operate separately, independently, without much collaboration and with no unified plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
think we
so
have one
much.
more
We have one more question from Marcia Carter. Then we'll switch gears.
While Ms. Carter's coming up, I just want to recognize Councilman Sherry Dorsey, who wasn't here at the top of the hour, and also Red Clay Superintendent Murph Doherty.
Okay, I had a just really simple question is, what plan is there that you have in place to address the school principals or the school staff that has already had a history of failing the students? So, for example, let's just do Warner, for example, where 2 out of 10 of the kids are not doing well in reading or in math, haven't met the state standards. So, excuse me, only 2 out of 10 have met the state standards for reading and math for 3rd graders. So when you look at that, what plan do you have in place to address the school administration that have successfully, or excuse me, historically failed the students?
Yeah, I'll start this way. It's our intention, it's not our intention actually, to take over the work of the districts themselves. We think they need to be held to a higher standard, which is one of the reasons we're taking the 3 years before we actually implement to make sure that Red Clay, Brandywine, and Colonial are up to meeting that standard as we go into what could potentially be sort of a new paradigm. So we're very thoughtful about that because the notion that we would come in, make some declarations about what educational leaders will do in their schools, we don't think would be of benefit to actually making the true change that we need. What we do think, though, is if there is one significant metropolitan district that we can hold accountable across some key measures that we all agree on, we can move that needle for the very fact that that has not been evaluated in the past.
Okay, so is there power within the commission administrative power that's going to allow you to address the teachers and administrators that people feel like are not effective?
Our only power has been our ability to convene around the issues, to advocate as appropriate, both legislatively and at a grassroots level, and to continue to make recommendations and evaluate our success over time. We are not advocating for any more power than that. We think there's power in all those aspects.
The authority to do what you're describing falls between the Department of Education and the districts, school districts. And that's the way it operates. There is one factor I think is worth pointing out. The timeline we proposed was in part intended to allow the districts impacted. That's certainly Red Clay, but it's also Christina, because when they make this change in boundaries, they're going to be significantly impacted. And that may, I would expect that in both cases, you're going to see a change in the configuration of the schools and the feeder patterns, and that'll mean a review of what the leadership should be, which schools will be performing what functions for kids, and then how the staffing will go forward. We wanted to make sure that that would be done in a very careful and thoughtful way in terms of configurations that might best address the needs of the students, and then the matching of the leaders of those schools and the educators to the demands and needs that arise. If we had truncated the decision process more, compressed it, that would have been virtually impossible. They would have had like 3 months to make some of these initial decisions, and what you would see would be as you would expect. I say this, right? They would actually continue to apply what they have. So if we want to make change, if we want to look at change, we needed to give this timeline a little different framework, and we've extended it by a year.
Do you have I know we have to figure out, but have you considered that reality that even if we do the change, we make these changes, and all the teachers and the leaders still look the same?
Sure.
How will they then, under new leadership, under new
Sure.
redistricting, how would that change the actual outcomes delivered to the children?
Yeah, well, I don't think there's anything we're proposing that we believe should remain the same, so that's not it. But I think your question poses the very seriousness of the challenge, and we would not dismiss it in any regard. Many things need to happen for this change to have the impacts that we all wanted them to have for student outcomes. We need to get started. What we are clear about is that we've got 60 years of experience with doing things the way we've been doing it without making any changes, and we know what those outcomes are. So what we do know for sure are the costs of doing nothing. If we do nothing, we can pretty well predict the outcomes because we can see them. We can count them, we can document them. But there's no guarantee, right? I agree with you completely that if we start this process, that every other piece, we have to be very careful. That's why Tony said we really need to evaluate this on a continuing basis. We have to produce, hold ourselves and everyone else accountable for what's been accomplished each year.
Okay, I want to be fair, so I want to stop there, but I do want to say really quickly, I think it's a very dangerous territory if we don't consider that reality and be willing to address the ineffectiveness of the teachers and administrators are at the school level after this change takes place.
Thank you very much.
So thanks for the opportunity. We're going to go into our public hearing session momentarily. I would just add, I hope you've heard that we don't believe that redrawing the lines or adding funding is the silver bullet to this solution. But we do believe we have to begin. We do believe we haven't begun. And we're hoping that regardless of the side you're on, that you're willing to participate aggressively in the process, hold us accountable. I'd say more importantly, hold the districts accountable for properly educating those kids. And you can count on us to continue to be completely transparent and open throughout the process. So thanks once again.